Well, welcome back. Here we go.
Oh, Lord.
Okay. Wait, are we moving on here? Moral about election? Are we on election now?
Actually, I don't know if we're going to get to election.
Oh.
John
Wait, are
S.
we still
Whale
on?
is an Anglican. No, he's not Anglican, is he? I
There's a
think
big
he's
fish somewhere.
he is a big fish. He is a very big fish. I can't remember if he's Anglican or Presbyterian, but he's from England. He is a big fish. I mean, he's quite a good theologian. You may say that, he's 1950s, 60s, maybe a little bit in the 70s, so you can say he's dated. But I tell you, his stuff is remarkable. And so I want to talk to you about sin, and I'm going to look at it through his chapter on sin, chapter 2, Man and His Sin, from his book. And I think this book is one of the
There you go.
classic
Nancy.
ones that he wrote.
Yeah.
There's
another one to buy.
Yeah, I'm afraid you have to go to. I don't know. No, I think you still can get it on Amazon.
I'm looking. I don't see any of his right now.
Okay, well then it might be Thrifty Books or something like that. So sin is a human epidemic. So you'll deal with it every day in your ministry. Some days more than others. If you have a staff, you will deal with it every day. To ask the question is to probe not only the doctrine, the question that theology asks, one of the questions theology asks is, what is the true nature of humanity? And to ask this question is to probe not only the doctrine of sin, but also the doctrine of anthropology. So there are two extremes. Two P's in optimism?
Yes.
No.
No, sorry. I'm just lacking today. I need extra. See, I don't have optimism. That's all.
An extreme pessimism?
Hmm?
An extreme pessimism?
Optimism and...
And these are two things of what?
Don't confuse me when I'm trying to spell.
He didn't say, he said there's just two extremes, I don't know if it's. Yeah, the extremes of what? Sin?
Views?
Here I'm giving you plenty of time to write. And
But there ain't nothing to write.
there are two extremes that Whale wants us to avoid.
Avoid
Well,
when we... I've lost the context.
Or taking the GOE.
Yeah. Two extremes of what?
views of sin? Or no, of the question of the true nature of humanity?
To what does this
The
promote
doctrine of
that?
sin, yes, the doctrine of sin. But it also impacts the doctrine of anthropology.
It's two extremes of the doctrine of sin.
Got it? Come on, stay up with me.
I'm gonna be your pointer, like Deacon Ann. I'm gonna be your pointer
Is that right? I know exactly where I am.
in your head.
All right, so let's talk about extreme optimism. That is Roman numeral I, 1, okay?
No, the extremes is I, A, it. Two extremes of the belief. of sin.
Extreme optimism. This is
a sin.
this is romantic. This is yeah. I guess extremes can be. It is romanticism to say that we can make a utopian society. It is like a person at a tea party who is told that there's a escaped lion about 20 yards away, but the party goer says, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Hand me another cucumber sandwich." It's like,
What?
just totally putting your head in the sand.
Hmm.
There's no sense of what is real in one's immediate surroundings. In the military, we call this a severe lack of situational awareness. Now, there was extreme optimism in the 19th century.
Shakers.
Oh yeah, Shakers would be a good example of that. Any of the other German communities that rose up in this country during that time, who tried to set apart a utopian society. They come under
The
this.
Hutterites are still going.
Yes, they are probably the only.
Who?
Except I take that back.
Amish.
Yeah, the Amish.
No, I said the Hutterites.
Hooterites.
Who are the Hutterites?
Hooterites.
Never mind, Horton, it's okay.
And I can't remember them. I get their magazine quarterly. It's called Plow. Anyway, they're extreme. They're the extreme Reformation. Oh well, it'll come to me. But there is another community that has survived.
Not Mennonites?
Yeah, the Anabaptists. That's right, the Anabaptists. Yeah. So extreme optimism was challenged in a novel by Herman Melville, of course, the 19th century book Moby Dick. He makes a not so veiled statement about Captain Ahab's nemesis, the great white whale.
No connection, no relation.
No.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I thought the same thing.
And they're spelled the same way, they gotta be cousins.
I'm sorry.
So what does the white whale represent? Do you remember?
What? Well,
Do you remember Moby Dick? From
I read it.
Evil.
Yeah.
Evil.
It was evil, yeah. Yeah, it's the symbol of evil in the universe. But as J.S. Whale says, we prefer Emerson, who asks us to be cultured and spiritual and hopefully look like the rest of the world that's evolving somehow, some way into matter. Meaning there's a spirit of accumulation happening in the 18th century.
Transcendentalism,
Yeah, that's Emerson's. Yeah.
yeah.
So there's only an upward arc
Mm-hmm.
of our progress.
Well, that's kind of where liberal Christianity was in
Yeah.
the 19th century.
It's very true, Jim. Yep. So instead, we, the people of the world, are discovering again and again the depth of evil in the heart of humankind. Thus, Whale concludes that sin is public enemy number one because its roots run deep in everyone, in society.
And how does this go with optimism?
It doesn't.
Whale is saying that extreme optimism needed to be,
Not dead.
and an author like Herman Melville came in and was writing in the midst of this extreme optimism of the mid 19th century, and he's saying, "Oh no,
That's not reality.
it's not reality. There's a white whale out there, and it's our nemesis, and it's evil."
Same for Hawthorne. His terrifying short story called Young Goodman Brown.
Young
Definitely
Goodman Brown.
worth your going back and reading now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Scarlet Letter.
Yep.
So, yeah, he and Melville were friends. Hawthorne slightly
I
older.
think they worked in the same customs house.
So,
Yeah.
as Christians, we have three things to watch out for. Beware and be careful of utopian idealism. 2,
Wait. Please. Yes.
2, be careful of man's perfectibility in this lifetime.
Mm.
Mhm. We're trying to be perfect?
In this lifetime.
That leads to us thinking that we can be God.
It really does, yeah. And 3, be extremely careful of righteousness, for it can easily be cloaked as self-righteousness. Now let me pause with that for a little bit. So that's, and there, actually there's 4. There's 4 and not 3, but I'm going to pause with 3 and then I'll give you the 4th, all right? So it's easy to be blind to this idea that righteousness could be cloaked as self-righteousness. And it happens not only with individuals, but it can happen easily within worshiping communities, and it can happen easily within nations. So the self-sufficiency of the morally religious person is itself the full measure of sin. The self-sufficiency of the morally religious person
Self-sufficiency.
is itself the full measure of sin. Why?
We haven't finished the first sentence.
Okay, all right.
Sufficiency of the.
Pause.
Morally religious person is.
Morally religious person is itself the full measure of sin.
It's satanic, it's prideful.
Prideful.
It's like the tax collector and the Pharisee who went into the temple to pray, and the tax collector says, "Thank you, Lord, I'm not like the tax collector."
Well done.
Definition of sin.
Well done. Absolutely.
Yeah, self-fulfillment.
Which is huge self-absorbed pride in that story. Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, but think about it. Think how many people take pride in their moral perfection, you know. Oh, watch out. So this is where the concept of grace is so important. Think about the prodigal son. It is the grace of the Father who brings the son back to center in some ways. Notice both brothers are self-sufficient. One starts to come around. The other one, the older son, he's always pretty self-sufficient or self-absorbed. In the youngest brokenness, he makes his way back to the family, not expecting what he got in return. In the self-righteousness of the oldest, he never made his way back to the Father's grace, at least not in the amount of the story we get. He never really makes it back.
Assuming he's lost it.
He did lose it. Just look at his attitude.
I was looking at the father.
Oh, the father. Oh, okay.
No, I'm saying in the father's eyes, he never lost it.
Oh, I see. Oh,
That's a whole different.
yeah,
story.
yeah. But I think from the narrative of the story, we're told that this guy's really out. But yeah, the
They were both out.
father loves him absolutely, unconditional love,
Yeah.
Right.
which is a great indication of God's unconditional love for all of us. Yeah, you're right. That's good. The idea that all we need is goodwill, and we can overcome. Number 4. So there are 4 things to watch out for. I'll change that in my notes. The idea that all we need is goodwill, and we can overcome the sin of self-absorption is false. All it takes is goodwill.
And we can overcome evil.
Yeah.
This is there, Emerson.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and this is not a Christian doctrine. However, we have been led to believe that it is from. We've been led to believe this from our Sunday school teaching. I'm frustrated with the American Sunday school approach. Be good, be good, be good, be good, be good. What does your religion teach? To be good. See, we don't teach relationship. We teach this moralism that I don't believe is helpful in the long run.
So is goodwill then attitude intention without action?
It's attitude. It can have action, but the problem is that if you're going to rely on your goodwill for change and transformation to come, you're wrong. It's not going to come.
Because we'll always fail.
Yeah, because and part of that is eventually we're going to do the very same thing that's outlined earlier here, is that you become self-righteous in that attitude. Now there's checks and balances in that. If your spirituality is clear, that in the goodwill you're doing it in relationship to Jesus Christ and driven by Jesus Christ, that's a different ballgame entirely. It's when we adopt moralism that tells us all we have to do is be good and we'll change this world. Well, you might get some change in there, but you got to avoid the potential of self-righteousness. Ultimately, the changes and transformations that will come through the power of the Holy Spirit working in and around and through us. If we understand that, that's a different ballgame entirely. That takes the moralism out. That means I'm representing Jesus Christ in this moment, and Jesus wants me to reach out. That's a different thing entirely. My frustration with our Sunday school system is that we take the easy way out. And the easy way out is to turn relationship into moralism. So when kids decide, oh, I'm gonna, what does your religion teach, or what does your denomination teach? Teach to be good. Well, that's wonderful. Mine teaches that I have to transform the world. I have to go out and help people who are rebuilding from hurricane this or hurricane that. It's a different drive entirely and another kid who's been trained, you got to be good, buddy, got to be good, suddenly hears, oh my gosh, there's real conviction behind that person's. It's because they're driven by Christ, and it comes out. That's me. Okay, that's nobody else but just Scott's frustration.
And maybe I've got to be good, I've got to be good, I've got to be good turns yourself on inside rather than outward.
Yeah. There's a whole surrender that we're not teaching. A whole surrender to that we have to do it all, when in fact our spirituality tells us we need to surrender to do it. And it's counterintuitive. I know it is, but I think it's something we really need to be serious about in how we communicate.
Well, and then the other danger is, I grew up in the 60s, and what being good, there was a backlash, rebellion.
Rebellion, yeah. But it was still a rebellion of transformation. I think that's what people really want. That's what our millennials want more than anything, is to transform their world. But what they are getting in the church is be good.
Yeah.
Okay, boomer. Have you heard that?
Yeah, well, I am.
Well, no, there was a millennial in, was it Australia, New Zealand, somewhere, was talking about climate change. And, someone of our generation was kind of like ridiculing them, and she just turned to him and said, okay, boom.
Oh, I remember that. Oh, yeah, I did hear that. Yeah. Okay.
Boomers are catching a lot of flack anymore.
Yeah.
Well.
So here we have, I have just finished, for you note takers, number 1. I'm now moving to my number 2. And this is extreme pessimism.
Spelled incorrectly.
Spelled incorrectly.
Another I, pessimism. Not pessa.
Pessa?
Pessa.
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 Oh, Pessa.
Pessi.
Sorry.
I figured out what I'm missing.
Is there an A in there?
No.
It's an AI.
It's an I.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
And I said Eve. I was thinking in Spanish. Sorry.
Okay. So the other extreme is extreme pessimism. It is as unchristian as extreme optimism. Despair is real. However, when one despairs of God, it is blasphemy. And more to the point, it is atheism. Remember back to your Western civilization and the work of the philosopher Thomas Hobbes?
Yes.
Phil, you remember? Okay, I'm just
Who?
Leviathan.
The Leviathan, exactly. Yep, the Western civilization and the work of philosopher Thomas Hobbes and his book Leviathan was written in 1651. Moby Dick was written in 1851. 200 years. Why is that important? It's not. So what is?
Helps you remember.
Yeah, it's the way I remember. That's right. What is fascinating about Hobbes is his elevation of the state to a place of providential oversight. Thus, Hobbes had no real belief in God's redeeming grace. Instead, he believed in statecraft, which is the Leviathan. This is another attempt at a utopian society because only the state in Hobbes' eyes can ensure that human nature does not make society into a living hell.
You know, the worst of all wars is civil war, and that's what Hobbes had lived through, and that's why he felt the way he did, because he had seen the evil that men do.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the Roundheads and
Yeah,
the Royalists?
The Cavaliers and the Roundheads.
Yep. Well, and that World War I and World War II drove a lot of theology too.
Karl Barth.
Yeah. Bart. Yeah. Bart's
Bonhoeffer.
book on Romans was a result of absolute utter frustration at the state of the world in World War I. To some degree, I think he's really correct, but he also has misplaced trust in a state to exercise oversight with anything less than the same propensity towards creating a hell. If the state is your savior,
The state meaning the government.
absolutely.
Okay.
I think your trust is misplaced entirely. I certainly stand with the two great thinkers of Augustine and Calvin who had advocated for the need of the human condition to be redeemed. And I believe this is a biblical doctrine. The question that we have to ask is this: is the human heart totally corrupt to the point that we should call it totally depraved?
No.
I wouldn't say no. But doesn't mean we don't
Come
sin.
on, isn't anybody out there willing to say,
Doesn't
yeah?
No, doesn't mean we don't sin.
That's correct. And it
But
doesn't,
we're not completely depraved
but
either.
yeah, and it doesn't mean that we're not capable of doing good things too. See,
Or
that's
horrible things.
that's the problem with, I think, a misunderstanding of depravity.
Okay.
But anyway, we'll get there.
The image is damaged, but not totally destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what Whale is going to say. That's where I would stand also. Yeah. So J.S. Whale wrote, "If this is not blasphemous pessimism, then what is? What did it mean? The reformers, according to Whale, meant that the corruption extends to all of humanity. In other words, it affects all people by finding its way into all aspects of one's life. So it is all pervasive. However, it does not mean that every soul is as dark as mud. Instead, each soul is cloudy, or as I would say, extremely fuzzy, which colors what one sees, thinks, and does in all aspects of living.
So is this original sin?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's original sin, yeah.
Extreme pessimism?
No.
No.
This
The
definition.
humanity of the corruption of humanity.
He's saying total depravity is blasphemous. So that's extreme pessimism. He is saying
Total.
we need to come back to a more balanced understanding that the human soul is not as dark as mud, but instead is cloudy. And I added fuzzy, which colors the way one sees and thinks and does in all aspects of living. So he's not denying sin, and he's not denying that it affects all of our life. What he's saying is to buy into extreme pessimism is not helpful any more than buying into extreme optimism is helpful. So Paul's letter to the Romans in chapter 1, 2, and 3 paints a picture of the human condition as seriously flawed. But in spite of the gravity of the human heart, Paul is not saying humanity is incapable of doing good things. Please hear that. Paul is not saying we are incapable of doing good things, even though he is describing a heart that is in need of correcting or help, clearing up. Let's see. Instead, he is saying that humanity is in need of completion, that is, to be made fully human in the redemption of Jesus. Now, Whale puts it this way, quote, "The reformers knew that if you look at human virtue and merit, not from an ethical, but from a strictly theocentric standpoint, all righteousness is as filthy rags. As Paul wrote, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23. Ethically, the reformers recognized that the human being is made up of both good and evil, and sin differs in degrees and direction." Now, he in my opinion, Whale is a Reformation theologian of the 19th century, or the 20th century, okay? But what I like what he's saying is he's holding to what Paul is saying, but he's avoiding some of the extremes that have emerged since 16th century. Well, actually, before that, you can put Augustine in there too. So anyway, that's one of the reasons why I want you to hear what Whale has to say, because he stands somewhere in between these two options. I think that's a pretty good place to stand.
So he's an extreme realist?
Well, if you would define realism for me, I might go there.
I don't know, I'm not sure,
He's an
but between
Anglican.
optimism and, what?
Via media, he's in the middle, right?
Yeah, very good. To some extent, you can be, you don't have to buy anything I say.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so you can be a skeptic on that.
No, I'm not disagreeing necessarily.
I know,
I'm
but
trying
you
to
don't
find
know.
a label for it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, and when I mean skeptic, I mean you don't know yet.
Mhm.
So that's fine. But let me go on and we'll see if we can sort it out. To some extent, the Reformation has an uncompromising reaction to the humanistic theology of the Renaissance period.
Mhm.
The values changed to individualism, skepticism, rationalism, empiricism, well-roundedness, especially through education, secularism, and classicalism. Classicalism, of course, would be the rebirth of ancient Greek and Roman ways. It was a time of cultural, artistic, literary, and political change through education. For all the good that the Renaissance, in its emphasis on returning to the cultural values of the classical age, did, it could not answer this question: what must I do to be saved? That was not a part of the Renaissance's questions. So a well thought out biblical doctrine of anthropology provides people with a balanced view of humanity. Somewhere between optimism and humanism, the optimism of humanism and the pessimism of cynicism, lies a healthy and wholesome view of what it means to be human. Quayle believes that as long as Christian theology stays true to the four important principles, it will continue to provide a message of hope. And those four messages are: be careful of utopian idealism, be careful of man's perfectibility in this lifetime, be extremely careful of righteousness, for it can easily be cloaked in self-righteousness, and the idea that all we need is goodwill and we can overcome the sin of self-absorption. So all I'm trying to say is that I don't know what to call it, Katie. I'm not sure what to call his middle way. But he offers the intellectual challenge to say there has to be something in here, because both extremes represent something that's destructive to the individual and to humanity.
It's a little bit like, we were talking about earlier about asceticism. There is a right asceticism, and there's also one that's extreme,
Yeah.
wrong,
Uh-huh.
and the opposite would be to say, oh, I don't need to be ascetic about anything. Everything goes,
Okay.
no problems.
Well done. Yeah, I think that's true. That's probably a good way to kind of to put this in some kind of helpful context.
Maybe my problem is with the word optimism. I don't know. I'm thinking about our Christian hope in Jesus, and I mean is hope not optimistic?
Oh yeah, it's optimistic.
You might say, I'm not going to go to the wall for this one, but one might say that an example of extreme optimism is universalism.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
There's no hell. It's
Okay.
all going to come right in the end.
Yeah, I think
That
that's
might be extremely
helpful.
optimistic.
Katie, you come up with something else. I understand. No, are we supposed to be full of hope and pushing towards hope and all that kind of stuff? Absolutely. And Whale would never say we're not
Okay.
supposed to.
Okay.
It's that when this dupes us into thinking we've arrived,
Okay.
that's the moment we have stepped into sin big time, because we have not arrived. We have now become self-righteous.
Well, it's placing optimism in ourselves.
Right. Very good.
Okay.
Yeah, it does place it in ourselves, but under the mask of I'm being religious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see, that's really dangerous. That, for me, that's what's really dangerous. It's the atheist. It's kind of out there. It's kind of something, kind of honest about that. But I hate it when there's a self-righteousness that's hidden behind a religious veneer. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So the Bible has several ways of speaking of sin. Sin is ultimately against God, and it is described as missing the goal, or missing the mark, or the breaking of a relationship, or ungodliness, or it just goes on. Rebellion or hardness of heart. All of these things sort of describe this idea of sin. There's a guy J.E. Colwell, Colwell. He wrote that sin can be summed up as, quote, a state of our being that separates us from the holy God. That's pretty simple. I think it's pretty basic. That sin is that which separates us from the holy God. Now, does that mean God goes away? No, we're not talking about God going away. We're talking about a block, though, in our relationship, a block in our ability to connect and respond to God. The Holy Spirit is still there. Bart defines sin as nothingness, which is not nothing. Instead, Bart tries to capture the contradiction between covenant love, the covenant love of God, and a break in that covenant. So sin then is break. And if you break that relationship, there's nothingness there. There's nothing there. It's covenant or not.
So it's the opposite of us being created, of us being created, in a sense.
It's like the very first thing we talked about,
Yeah.
the hotel load folks.
Creating a void.
Mm-hmm. You said you're getting a headache?
I think it,
Or do you have to avoid?
probably, but then I've seen even more.
You go to chamber pot.
There we go.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I'm still, I'm missing pieces. And
Okay.
I can't figure out how I'm missing pieces, and, but I think this makes more sense than almost anything else, because that was also one of my reading through things and listening, and, how is it that we define sin? And what, what does that mean?
Yeah, okay.
And does it mean different things for different people? And if we talk about sin as being turning away from God, and that's different than having a break with God. I mean, I think I was trying to think of my sermon this morning, and I think I made some kind of a comment about my relationship, my conversation with God is clogged.
Oh, that's a great image.
So now I'm thinking, okay, so I'm looking at sin.
Okay.
I mean, I see, so I'm trying to fit this all in together, and all of this extreme pessimism, extreme opposite, and it's like, wait, where's reality? So again, I'm trying to,
Yeah.
where are those rails,
Uh-huh.
trying to fit this in and think about when people, if people come to me and say, I have sinned, is it because I lied to my cats? No.
No.
Sin has to do, but again, then sin goes back, missing the mark. It's that mark of connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
It is breaks the relationship.
I am
yeah.
better understanding
Okay.
the word covenant.
Okay. Good.
I'm slow, sorry guys.
No, that's all right. No, that's great. I love that revelation, because we are covenant people. And I'll tell you something else. You may not like it. We are a covenant country, and we need to get back to our covenant.
Just gonna toss this one out. This was the one my spiritual advisor left me with. Sin is failure to love.
Okay. Yeah, and God is love. So I can see see if that works for you, run with it, because that's helpful.
It obviously stuck with me.
Yeah, sure. That's good. Yeah. Yeah, there's a rupture there, I guess, is what's happened. Sometimes it's really subtle, though. And that's that world of the right of reconciliation that sometimes you're ferreting out.
What's that? Moral relativism? No?
Moral virtues?
No.
What are you talking about?
Let's go back. Help.
I think I know what you're talking about.
The transgressions, the little
The
transgressions.
the big transgression and the little one, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
One of
Small
the-
betrayals.
Small betrayals.
Oh.
Large betrayal.
Thank you.
Waddell. Okay, got
Alright.
it. Yeah. I'm
I
with
knew
you.
it.
There we go. There we go.
Yes, yes,
And how many
yes.
small betrayals equal, how many venial sins equal a mortal
I know, and you get into moral theology, Roman Catholic moral theology.
Yeah.
That's a super important question.
Exactly, because it depends on your penance.
That's right. It does.
5 Our Fathers and 5 Hail Marys, or 3 Our Fathers and
That's
3 Hail
right.
Marys, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I'm glad we had some revelation there. So we can dive into the doctrine of sin, but the right way to do it is to step back and evaluate where your starting point might be. For example, we might start with the image of God. Aquinas asked the question, what was lost in the fall? His answer is supernatural reason. That is, the ability to be subject to God. The reformers said the fall led to total corruption of human nature, that is, reason and everything connected to it, such as mind, will, and emotions. Romans 3:23, as I've already quoted, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Means that sin is universal. It is not just for a few. Instead, sin is in and thus affects everyone. Donald Blesh, who was a Reformed theologian from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I think, he wrote, sin is a spiritual infection that in some mysterious way is in all of us. And thus the process of theology takes over and we start asking good questions. What does it mean to be the image of God? What is the impact of the fall on the true image of God?
But it says in Genesis that Adam and Eve would walk in the cool of evening with God, and then after that didn't happen. That conversation with God got...
It got more difficult, didn't it? It's not that God was gone. It's just that, I mean, they had the absolute utter best of any situation to have afternoon tea with God every day. I mean, that's pretty cool. How does sin affect the human soul and theories of original righteousness? And what are the existing theories of original sin? And how is sin transferred or not? And what are the theories on the nature of sin? All of these things start to come into, I know it's a headache, but those are questions that theology begin to ask and try to answer. And there's been a variety of ways of trying to answer those things. For example, the Pelagian view. Pelagian accounts for free will, and there is no such thing as original righteousness. All human beings were endowed with reason so that they could know God and endow Him and be endowed with free will so that they were able to choose and to do the good and with the necessary power to rule the lower creation. So Pelagius basically said that all good and evil by which we are praised or blameworthy does not originate together with us, but is done by us. We are born capable of each. That's what Pelagius says. We are born capable of each. And so let's see, that doesn't make sense.
Worse.
I don't know, I have really screwed up that. I apologize.
Circle it, put a star next to it.
I will, thank you. Yeah. Look, I'll be quite honest with you. I wonder sometimes if we actually don't really understand Pelagian, and that maybe Pelagius wasn't quite as off the wall as Augustine thought he was, or debated him. So, and that's one of the things I hope to do in my lifetime is to try to sort through Pelagius and have a better understanding of him. In fact, it was Father Gabriel who challenged me on that.
Well, our last year in church history, we were introduced to Pelagius twice. First time was as a heretic, and then as a mystic almost.
No, wasn't that Origin?
No, this was Pelagius.
That's Pelagius?
Yeah.
So what was positive out of that for?
Well, he wasn't fatalistic.
Okay.
Um,
Sure.
Yeah, that there was an element in there that we do have a say in.
Yes.
Pretty well.
Yes, absolutely. No, I can see that. Yeah, he's definitely not fatalistic because in essence your destiny is in your hands. You're going to make that decision, which is important to him.
And I think as was pointed out, however the debate started, they kind of hardened into extremes on both ends.
Yes, they did. Yeah, in fact, in Augustine's view, Augustine said that righteousness is a part of the original human nature. In other words, righteousness is intrinsic to the human nature of all humans. And I like that. I think. Whereas Pelagian said it's not about righteousness or unrighteousness. This is who you are, and you're going to make decisions along the way. I mean, that's my understanding. So there are no separate acts by which righteousness is infused into humanity. God's human creatures were created with holiness, thus there was not a separate act prior to or after the issue with Adam to place righteousness in the human nature. It's already there. So, go ahead.
And so we decide which path we're going to follow, in a sense.
Well, I think Pelagius would say that.
Mm-hmm.
That you're gonna decide the path you follow, and I think Augustine is saying you've got righteousness in you. That's the path that you're on already. You need to get your
But you
act
still have
together.
to choose that.
Yeah, and he would not deny that, but if you have righteousness in you, then the Spirit of God should be pushing you and directing you down that path. But there are things that get in the way, right? But he does talk about this. There's spontaneous. There's spontaneous moments of spontaneous of reaction or choices that are made that have in one's life. So Augustine is acknowledging that there's something that you have to make decisions along the way. He's not denying that.
I think that Augustine should be understood here as taking a more humane view of human beings. And I think that's will sound strange to you because, but the Pelagian view presents such a difficult path. You can always do the right thing.
Yes.
It's always up to you. You can do it.
Yeah.
And I think Augustine is saying, good luck. That's not going to happen. In fact, you're going to screw up and you're going to need to be forgiven and restart. And you cannot do it by yourself.
Right.
Trying to will kill you, as it were, because you'll know that you're failing.
Yeah.
So he was. It sounds on the surface that Augustine is being harsh, and Pelagian is being the good guy. But I think that the reverse is really true in the way I'm trying to explain.
Yeah, I understand. No, I appreciate that. It's very helpful. Yeah, and I have read those who talk about how hard it is, how the Pelagian pathway is really difficult, whereas Augustine is recognizing an internal righteousness that can be responded to and can, recognizing. That's why eventually in his latter days he came up with the double predestination stuff. But so he recognizes that you're not gonna. It's not easy along the way.
Yeah, Pelagius, you're carrying it all on your own shoulders.
You are,
And
absolutely.
That's where we get the works part of
That's right.
religion,
That's
is
where you
it?
get the works part, and that's where you get Augustine blasting him on that. and you, of course, you get the Reformation with Calvin and Luther picking that theme up again, as that's what they believe that they saw in the Roman Church. Okay. All right, well, let's take another break.